And did you guys plan out official assignments to share with them?
Hello. Welcome to our next session of the Sanibel Island Online Writers Conference for this year. I am here with three good friends, and I'm going to introduce them to you and then get out of here so they can talk to you about Flash and micro narratives. These three have been here as long as I've been here at the conference, and I'm pretty sure all three of them have been here longer than I have. I know Tom has because he started the conference. Beth Ann and John have been part of the core faculty for a long time, so we get to see them just about every year. And all three of them are published or experts in Flash and micro. Tom's book, Mobius Strips, came out recently. He talked about that a little bit yesterday. John literally wrote the book on it. It's called Flash with an exclamation point. And then Beth Ann has Heating and Cooling, her 52 micro memoirs that she also published. So they've got a lot to share on this topic, and I am going to sneak out of the frame here and let them go. So thank you guys for tuning in, and stick with us for the rest of the day. We got a bunch of good stuff coming up. So take it away, guys.
Thanks, Jason.
Let me
I think my purpose is to just hold up book covers.
Oh, that's what
you guys can just talk.
I have it here, but the Flash with an exclamation point, I stole that title, obviously, from James Thomas and Robert Shepard's book, and Denise Thomas, who did the first Flash fiction. And then they did Sudden Fiction, and then they did Sudden Fiction International, and blah, 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 blah. So, which I acknowledge, because it was the best. It's been called so many different things, but I thought Flash was the best title for it. And it happens, so I'll say this, sort of promotion. I'm along with James and Sherry Flick, one of the three editors of the next and final Flash fiction anthology from Norton, which will be called Flash Fiction America. And James, who's the leader, he's the heart and soul of this organization, decided that Flash fiction now will stop at 1,000 words.
So that's the official definition now.
And he said, you got to draw the line somewhere, and it's 1,000 words. And we actually had a story that we wanted, and it was like 1,026 words. We voted it down. Well, we talked about it. It maybe still has a chance. Anyway, that's how I got into writing Flash fiction from reading Flash fiction. Reading James's book and the Sudden books, and realizing this is great pedagogical tools to bring these in, and you can read the whole story, and you guys can write a story, a draft of a story during class or between classes at home and all that. And I thought it was wonderful. And there were so many great stories. And I think of it as like the fictional equivalent of haikus in poetry, where they get you thinking, they get you moving in a certain direction, they start you headed, and you kind of finish the story yourself. So anyway, I'll stop talking. I'll talk again later. Give you guys a chance to jump in.
Beth Ann, do you want to jump in now?
No, go ahead, Tom.
Okay, well, I was just going to respond to a couple of the things that John said. Similarly, it's interesting that we now have a definition or a limit of 1,000 words, because some of the stories in my book actually started off as exercises in my class. After I became a father, my writing time became severely limited. And so I started giving homework assignments that I could do, along with my students. And so I would give them a prompt in class, and I found that students really, really respond well to having certain limitations. Whenever I just say, write a story as long as it needs to be about whatever you want, they get that writer's block. They get the oh no, the fear of the blank screen.
Right.
But if I say, okay, this story has to be between 450 and 650 words, it has to use the following words, and it has to be set in the kitchen, and there has to be a conflict, all of a sudden they're all like, oh, okay, at least I have some direction and I kind of know where to start. And sometimes I even give them the first line and the last line, so then they know what the bookends are and what the parameters are. And actually, I found that I really thrive with those kind of restrictions as well. And it's like Robert Frost said, to write poetry without form is to play tennis without a net. I'm paraphrasing, but and it's the same thing with a story. If you have no parameters whatsoever, not to say you can't write great stories, but it can be very daunting to some people, myself included. And so, Beth Ann, before we went live, said, are we going to be offering any writing exercises to our viewers? And we had talked about that, but I don't think any of us planned on doing it. But I will just throw out one exercise now that people might want to think about. And it's one of the stories in my book. And it's called, let me see. It's been so long since I've looked at my own book. It is Inside Aisles. And I just stole the form from poetry, the Abecedarian story, where every single sentence begins alphabetically with the letter. So the first sentence begins with A, the second sentence begins with B, and so on through the end of the story. And the final sentence begins with Z. And I gave lots of other things. I said, at least, I said it had to be like 1,000 words, and it had to have at least 100 words of dialogue. And there had to be at least one question within the dialogue, things like that. And so, and I loved the stories that my students came up with from that exercise. And I would say at least a handful of them were better than the one that I came up with that ended up getting published. So, so that's my contribution to an exercise for this panel. And so, Beth Ann, since you asked the question, what's yours?
Yeah, so I'll talk just for a sec before I go into a writing prompt, because I'm coming to the flash forms not through the doorway of fiction, but through the doorway of nonfiction.
Right.
Although I'm a big fan of flash fiction, and I think the popularity of flash fiction has been so exciting that it's one of the things that inspired me for this project. So the book that Tom so kindly held up is called Heating and Cooling, 52 Micro Memoirs. And I wrote it because before that book, I wrote a novel with my husband, and it's about the flood of the Mississippi River in 1927. And it was a really big project. It took us 4 years to write it, together. So that's kind of high stakes. If it tanked, that wouldn't have been awesome. But, luckily it didn't. It kind of found its readers. And so afterwards I thought, I guess I'll just be writing a novel by myself. But I just wasn't doing it. Like, I'd go to my notebook every day and I'd write down little funny thoughts or bits of overheard conversations or, crazy dream, a weirdo memory. And I kept waiting for them to add up to something, and they kept not adding up to something. And then it finally occurred to me, what if I need to stop trying to make these into another form? What if they are a form, just a really small form? And I came up with the term micro memoir. And once I did, it kind of helped me conceive of what I was doing. So I wanted to take all the pleasures and use them for my own means. So from poetry, I wanted that extreme compression and abbreviation and lyrical power. And from fiction, I wanted the ability to create an arc of meaning and to have character and tension. And from nonfiction, I wanted truth. So that's what I did. I wrote a book of very small true stories about my life that borrow from the techniques of flash fiction.
And I got to tell you, they also borrow heavily from poetry, I would say, in terms, and you said that, the compression, the abbreviation, but also I loved, I was looking through both of your books today, preparing for this panel. And, I'm already familiar with the books, but I wanted to reacquaint myself. And I'm just struck by how expertly, Beth Ann, you use titles, because most of your titles don't actually appear in the stories themselves. Like the words you use for your titles don't always appear in your stories or in your memoirs. And I just find that fascinating, because your titles really almost create a suspense, because they immediately plant a question in my mind, like, what does this mean? Or where is this going to go? And just even, I wrote a couple down, like, I love the Married Love series that you have, because like in Married Love 3, it's about a couple sitting in a car and it's cold and they kind of bump hands, reaching for each other's seat warmers, and I would have called it seat warmer, or something like that. And in 4, where you're talking about the frozen peas on Tommy's testicles, and then later that night you defrost them and you make dinner, I would have called that frozen peas. But the married love, I love that it's more evocative and provocative in terms of and suggestive in your titles. And so I'm curious, and I've seen that in poetry a lot too, and I'm wondering if that's where you got that impulse.
I think what we're trying to do in flash forms is get everything so small. So why would you waste the space of a title repeating something in the body of it when you can use the title to launch into the action?
Yeah.
So, the game for me with this is to see how much I could cut out. And David Mamet said, omission is a form of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And I really kind of took that as my guiding light to see how much I could cut out. Another thing that I used to think about was this series of sketches by the artist Matisse. And it has his first one, which is a very lifelike looking bull. And in every subsequent sketch, he cuts out some details until the end. It's just a simple line, but it really is evoking a bull. And it's so interesting to see how he moved himself to the process of taking things out, taking out details to reveal an essence. And so that's what I was trying to do. How little do I need? How much can I get away with by cutting?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, full disclosure for viewers out there who don't know me or John or Beth Ann, John was my professor in grad school. And I remember one of the things he said in class, he said, whenever you write, you want to throw in everything you know into everything you write, and then basically take out everything that's not essential. And that's how I approach. I overwrite everything. If there's 1,000-word story, it was 10,000 words first.
Right.
And then I just chipped away everything that I felt was inessential and didn't serve the story itself, or was only serving my ego.
All the words that you left out are still there. They're just not in black and white on the page because they got you to know who the characters were and what this world is about and all of that. That notion that Beth Ann talked about Mamet. Mamet says, tell the story in the cuts and what you leave out. And William Trevor, who began his artistic life as a sculptor, says you have to have it like a sculptor. You have to have enough to throw things away. And if you don't have enough to throw away, then you got to make stuff that you're going to throw away. You have to build a world and then cut it back. It's easy to cut, and it's more difficult to add things. So overwrite. I'm exactly like you. I just overwrite. I'll figure it out later. Follow the accident. Take the tangents. Go on the digressions. Some of them you're gonna learn something, even if it doesn't make it to the page. Every detail you put in. You furnish a kitchen. You talked about furnishing a room and all that. It's like every detail when it tells you about the kitchen, about the people who live there. They're not all going to be on the page. The ones on the page are the ones that John Gardner called vivid and significant, that those are the ones that make it to the end. I was going to say, let's see. So here, exercises to do. One of the ones quickly that because one of our other conference members, Lynn Barrett, who's, I don't know, she on today? She's on today, right?
She was on a couple hours ago, yeah.
Okay. That she in this book, she rewrote a fairy tale. And that's become kind of a common thing, especially among fantasy writers. Take a fairy tale, rewrite it, set it in contemporary time. I did it in my screenwriting class this semester. We talked about doing Hansel and Gretel, setting it in Miami, 2020. Well, not 2020 because no COVID. We weren't dealing with COVID. Putting it contemporary, and of course, all the wolves live in the city, not in the country. So they come from the country into the city and are left here. Do it that way. So that's the other thing I was going to say. So here's a more elaborate exercise, but go to a flea market or a thrift store and buy any used object that catches your eye or engages your imagination. Study it, clean it, place it by your desk, admire it, write about it, take a photo of it, describe it in as much detail as you can. Tell the story through its imagined provenance. Who are all the people who owned it? Why did they get rid of it? Did they lose it? How did it end up at the flea market? The story is about the person or people you discover, not the object itself. People who coveted at one point or discarded this kind of object. And so, you know, and like you said, write the story in 500 words. I said, but that's one from the book. But it's getting out there and explore. You know, people say, where are the stories? They're out there. They're not in here. They're not in your room. You got to go out and find the stories. Pay attention. The world is a provocative place. And this is what Beth Ann was talking about earlier. It's like, and we want to make ourselves susceptible to the provocations. That's why we leave the writing desk, to get out there and looking for material. Where is it? Pay attention to the world. This is old advice, right? W.H. Auden. The first act of writing is noticing. Mm-hmm. That's what we're trying to do.
Right. And in such a compressed form, you know, you have to throw in, like, who is it? William Carlos Williams said, there are no ideas but in things. Mm-hmm. And so getting this object from a flea market, all of a sudden it evokes all these different ideas and all these different potential stories, like, as you said, from the people who owned it.
Right. Yeah. It's like a story can begin with any detail, anything, any story. Everything is implicit in anything. Mm-hmm. So you just think, you know, every time I say that, I think of, I must have written this early on. So I think of a pair. I grew up in New England. I think of, as you did, and a pair of like damp work boots slid underneath a radiator, right, in the winter, and the radiator's clacking, and then you start hearing, and you start smelling that, you know, the heat on in the house and the cold outside, and just that, building a story but just on it. Who owns those shoes? Who's in the house? You know, take a look around. What do you see? Is there a dog bowl? Oh, they have a dog. What's the dog's name? Where is it? You know, all that. So you just kind of, again, that's what we do. A friend of mine, his wife just called me. Sad story. He died recently. But we hung out in high school every day. We stood downtown Worcester, Massachusetts, across the street from City Hall, and we made up stories about the people who walked by. Mm-hmm. Every day. And of course, if you go there at the same time every day, you see the same people walking by. So these little bits of flash became like novels after a while. We kept saying all this, you know, who these people were, making it up. So, and that, I didn't know it, but that's what I was training myself to write stories, to pay attention and all that. So, and then, yeah.
We're already getting questions here. How do you know what to cut out and what to keep? How do you know if you're giving the reader too much or too little? Beth Ann, you wanna run with this one?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of overwriting too, and then the idea of you know, cutting as much as you can and trying to let the reader participate in the meaning making, which is what happens when you give just enough but not too much. The Russian poet Marina Tsvetaeva says, the fatigue of the reader does honor to both the reader and to me. Like, when you're reading, you're imaginatively participating in the meaning of the sentence. You know, there's some of the smallest fiction that I know is called hint fiction. It was edited in this book by Robert Smallwood. I bet you know it, John. And, mm-hmm. You know, here's one. It's by someone, Camille Estes. I don't know her. And the title is Peanut Butter. And the story is, he was allergic. She pretended not to know. I just love how that makes my brain go into an awesome place where I'm having so much fun, you know, for many, many more words than that story, creating that story in my own weird brain. So that's what I think the key is, to cut enough that you're allowing the reader to participate. Although I understand that might not be the best answer because it's a little bit abstract. Sometimes it's actually better to look at revision examples and try and compare versions. Tom, do you have a more eloquent answer than mine was?
I cannot beat the peanut butter anecdote, but I would just say, you know, what, and this is advice that you give to writers no matter what they're reading or what they're writing, but I always read it aloud. Mm-hmm. And I try to imagine that someone else is reading it, or even better, someone else is hearing me read it. And then I try to imagine, will they be bored or engaged here? If I think they're going to be bored, or if I am bored reading what I've written, I know that's something that I need to cut. So I really do believe that, letters on the page work in the same way that notes on a score work. You have to hear them to see if they actually work, and if there's any music to them, and if there's any movement, and any arc, if there's dynamics, all those things. And so I'm a big advocate of reading everything aloud that you've written. And if it doesn't sound right, then you cut it. Or, if it's too thin, then you add to it as well. It's not all just subtraction. There could be areas where you have to add.
Let me follow up with on what Beth Ann was saying, that reading is a creative act, just as writing is. And a story is a collaboration between the reader, the writer, and the reader. And the writer gives the reader some cues or some clues that the reader then dreams with. This is back to John Gardner's idea of the fiction writer is creating a dream in the reader's mind. And if you tell the reader too much, the reader doesn't participate. The reader sits back. You want the reader leaning in, like what's going on in that. So, and you overwrite. And sometimes the question was, how do you know? Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes somebody else has to tell me. Mm-hmm. You said that before. You don't need to say that again. Or you went a little too far with this. We're too long. Sometimes you actually do it yourself when it's all done and you go back and reread it. I'm thinking about longer things, that takes longer to go. But you go back and look at it, and what's work. You're a good judge of your own work. What can I get rid of here? And you get rid of everything that you can get rid of. I think anything. If the story stands with what you took out, then it's fine.
And wasn't it Raymond Carver who said he knew when something was done when he started putting back in the periods and commas that he had taken out in the last revision? It's like, the whole idea of eventually you have to abandon you've revised it as much as you feel you can at that point, and then you just have to abandon it and hope that it's written as well as you possibly could have written it, and that you've taken out everything that's unnecessary, you've included everything that is necessary, and you are opening it up to the potential of a conversation with your readers.
Yeah, I see there's another question here. Do you see it about overwriting? It's interesting that all the flash fiction observers here are into overwriting. Talking about that. And the question went away when I just addressed it, so I'm not sure what it was. Oh, do you find many stories? Do you find several stories when you overwrite? Yes, you do. You find characters that you can come back to. Might not be able to find it. It might not be a subplot in what you're reading or writing right now, and especially if you're doing fiction, you got to give that person their own piece of flash fiction. Go do that, somebody else. But if you write one story, you can write for the rest of your life. You've created a world. You can just keep looking. That's what Faulkner did, right? Let me just look around and see who's living over here and who's over here and what's there. Just keep going. So.
Yeah. I also would say, I'm sorry, Tom, go ahead.
No, please, you.
I would like to say, okay, I've written this thing that's 5,000 words. And I really like this one part, so I'm going to have 4 other 1,000-word stories. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't work that way for me, which is to say, I just have had to get comfortable with writing more than I need, and that it's not economical. It's not economy of narrative that I'm practicing when I'm writing, because a lot of it is stuff that I just cut. But I realized I had to write it to get to the good stuff. It is painful, though, in a way, to be someone who hates waste and would like to be able to use everything and make the most of everything. But instead, a lot of it is just stuff that I realize in retrospect, I wouldn't have gotten to this place if I hadn't written all this bad stuff first.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that before we get to the next question that I'm a big fan of composting and recycling, both on the page and in life. And so I think that anything, instead of throwing it away entirely, I at least hold on to it. And that's why I write longhand first, because then I have a tangible, piece of evidence of my decision making. Whereas when I write on the computer and I delete something, it's kind of gone forever, because my memory is terrible and I don't remember everything that I deleted. So I save all my notebooks with all of my everything crossed out and all that. And then, if I ever get stuck, I go back to it and see if there's any potential in it for something now, because maybe I wasn't in a position to meet its potential when I first wrote it. And so I hope that I can, use it later. And I don't know if you guys do that as well, but I try to save everything and then go back to it if I need it.
I also write with a pen, and I also have, probably 50 manila folders with different stories, different things over here with the handwriting in it that hasn't made it. Obviously I type all these out and then work with it there, but the creative process for me is connected to my hand in drawing, which is what writing is. It's drawing. And so it makes it a more visual experience for me. There's another question about Flash. And how do you strategies to ensure your Flash isn't just a slice of life or episodic? When I just looked at that, I was reminded in the book I wrote, and no, in my own mind. But when I started writing the book, I was said, "What's the difference between flash fiction and prose poetry?" Right? I mean, I was doing that, and I didn't know the answer. And I asked 3 of my poet friends, the Campbell McGrath, Denise Duhamel, and Julie Marie Wade, what they had to say about it and all that. And it's in the book. I'm not going to read what they say, but one of the things after reading what they had to say, listening to them, and it was one of the things I think that I expect that fiction has to be at least as well written as poetry. You alluded to the music and the sound of the thing. It's really important. It has to do everything, and it has to kind of tell a story. And the question alluded to is too episodic or slice of life. I think maybe one of the differences between prose poetry and flash fiction is that there's a narrative drive. There's some kind of, it's telling a story in some way. It might not, when you think of flash fiction, one of the things that is missing from flash fiction sometimes is a fully developed plot. That's gone. Plot is essential for me in novels, novellas, traditional short stories and all that. You can do away with it by suggesting it. And again, letting the reader per se, this is where it's going. Like Beth Ann's story about the peanut butter. We know the rest of that story. We're already thinking about what happens next and all of that. So just that kind of idea of narrative drive, I think. And Robert Olin Butler has said the important thing in fiction for him is like a sense of yearning. There's got to be that there, and I think maybe that's part of maybe some flash fiction is a bit episodic, a bit slice of life. That's all right. I think it's okay.
But it also, as Beth Ann said, it can suggest it's the iceberg theory. You're giving the tip, and then everything underneath is the subtext that you're going to explore long after you put down the book and stop. I mean, I just opened up one of my favorite micro memoirs from Beth Ann. I hope you don't mind that I'm going to read your work to you. Returning from spring break, junior year at Notre Dame. That's the title. And the memoir, I think, has as many words as the title. Swapped the rosary on my bedpost for Mardi Gras beads.
Great.
The end. and I mean, that works so beautifully in terms of suggesting so much. You give us a time, you give us a setting, you give us a situation, and then and I don't mean this in a demeaning or dismissive way, but it almost works like a joke. Yeah. The best comedy is pressure released at the end, and it's unexpected. And that's what you've achieved here. And you achieve it repeatedly throughout this book, but this is just one of the more memorable ones for me. And so I'm wondering if you ever think about that when you're writing your micro memoirs in terms of the compression and the idea of that pressure release and that suggestion.
Yeah, for sure. And I think flash writing in general provides great opportunities for humor just because it is stripped of exposition and we just have the bones. And what else is like that? The joke, like a priest, a rabbi, and a monk go into a bar. We don't need to know anything else about them, but whatever's going to happen is going to take that thing we think we know and flip it.
Mm-hmm.
And, what we're going to be left with is something that makes sense, but not logically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what we're turning to flash fiction to as well. Like, how quickly can we take the elements that we're expecting and end up someplace else, someplace that we didn't predict, but it was there from the start. That, surprising but inevitable feeling we talk about, we go to fiction for.
Right.
I'm gonna read a story, if I may, since you did, from this book, not by me. And I'll say this though, my favorite story in a way, the most luminous story for me, the one I think about the most is Tom's story, Mobius Strips, and hear about a father and son and all that. That story slays me, but I'm not going to read that either because I don't want to embarrass you.
Thank you.
Read a piece of flash by another Sanibel participant, Steve Allman. It's called Stop. And it happens to take place not far from where I grew up. And I know this place. I know where it is. Stop. Or maybe you're here. Sturbridge, Mass. Off the pike, punching a register at Roy Rogers, a girl in a brown smock. America comes at you on buses and caps and shorts, fuming. What the hell? You're killing each other anyway. This kind of loneliness. What are words? You've got chores, duties, an inanimate world that needs you. Sometimes, late afternoon, you scrape the grill and figure this could be love, this clean violence, the mealy shavings and steel beneath. There are other ideas out there in magazines and movies, but you see your life, that which persists, the dumpster out back, the counter dulled by your hands, relish troughs to fill. Some days the clouds are so thick they seem weighted. You are kind and not especially pretty. You do your job. You are polite. At great expense, you smile. Your best friend died just down the road in an accident at night. You laid a pink beer before the marker, and you persisted. You persist. And it's beautiful, isn't it? It's very Chekhovian to me, that sense of loneliness, the poetry of loneliness that he gets there. And it's just, and you, now I'll be thinking about that Roy Rogers and that counter and all that stuff for the rest of the day, just stays with you.
Yeah, and what's remarkable there in Steve's piece is it's called Stop.
Yep.
And all of the movement in it is emotional.
Mm-hmm.
She's still standing there in the same spot the entire story, but so much is happening inside. And I think that might answer part of the question too, about how do you make it so it's not just anecdotal or episodic. It's like there has to be some movement, either externally or internally, and some change. Ideally, there's both external and internal happening at the same time. But in there, it totally worked that she didn't move, but so much is happening at the same time.
There's a kind of story I'm trying to. There's a. This is not me. It's in the book, but I won't find it quickly. But I'm quoting somebody who did a book back in the 70s, or 50s, 60s about flash fiction. And he broke it down into there's several kinds of stories, and one of them was he has a name for it. I don't know what it was, but it's a moment that stands for the rest of the life. Mm-hmm. It's a moment like this, what you're doing at work, and the whole life is evoked from just looking at what's going on right now. You know so much more about that person, and I think that's what Steve accomplished in that. It's like, I know, okay, I know she's got to get up in the morning, try to start the car, hope it's the battery didn't die overnight, scrape the windshield, get in, drive down the pike to that and see the same, all of that.
Yeah.
What's at home, all that. Just beautiful.
Yeah. And all those seemingly insignificant but pivotal moments in your life are the ones worth writing about, and the ones that basically define who you are, you know? And what you're describing, it's not the epiphanal moment like in Joyce, but because that's just the sudden realization, but that sudden realization could, you know, ripple out and become the defining thing of your life, right?
Yeah, it could. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, can the resolution of the plot be left to the reader's imagination in a flash fiction piece? And I would say, let's expand this a little bit, Jose, and say also a flash memoir piece.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So,
The answer is yes. You know, those, and it happened, I'm mentioning Chekhov again, because I've been rereading Chekhov like in the last couple of weeks, just reading and reading and reading, because there's nothing better. I always say, if you feel like, you know, what you're not sure what you're doing, go read a book that you love to remind yourself what you're trying to do. So I go back and do Chekhov, and you realize at the end of his stories, they just stop like in the middle. It's never quite make the end, but you know the rest of it. It's just there. This happened. I did a workshop this week, and a student in the last line of a complicated sort of mystery story was like, I think it was a chapter and a longer now, about 25 pages, and it was all these, you know, people going. A woman who's been missing, and they're searching for her, and she's been abducted by her brother, all this stuff. The last line of out of the blue, everyone else is doing this and that, and they're arresting people. People are dying, all this stuff. The last line says, Millie was her name. Millie is sitting on a beach in South Africa, peeling an orange. Gurov was peeling a melon and Lady with a Dog, but she was sitting there. I said, that's Chekhov. I said, whatever you do, I don't care how you revise this story, make sure that's the last line. Mm-hmm. That's it. That is so good, you know, that I wanted to steal it. So you keep that there. It's like, we do our best. Sometimes we write better than we think we can, you know, like that. Oh, it's better. After we've revised it many times, in my case.
Beth Ann, you want to jump on this?
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Chekhov, because whenever I'm teaching the short story in any class, whether it's a lit class or a creative writing class, I always I'll teach, say, Guy de Maupassant or O. Henry, and maybe some fairy tales, and show how at the end of those stories, there's always a moral, or things are kind of tied up at the end and you sort of know people's fate and the resolution. And then all of a sudden Chekhov shows up, and my favorite story ever is The Lady with the Pet Dog. Yeah. And I mean, at the end, they both know that the hardest part is just beginning. And so it just basically throws this narrative, a grenade, and all these like little pieces of shrapnel go into the readers, where they're going to be picking at them for the next few weeks, thinking about, okay, what happened? But he does it in such an expert way that he's set it up that it's basically a lose-lose proposition. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not a win-win or a win-lose. It's like, no matter what decision they make, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be life-changing, and it's going to be tragic on some level. And even if they gain something, what they have lost is of equal or greater value than what they've gained, you know? And then Hemingway picks that up. You know, you think about Hills Like White Elephants. There's no resolution in that story. You know, she says she's just fine. I'm just fine at the end, after they've been arguing about this life-changing decision. And we spend a good half hour in my class after finishing that story, whether they really are fine or not. You know, and people were debating what their decision was. And so I think it's perfectly fine not to have a resolution at the end, but to leave possibilities for resolutions that the reader can mull over long after she stopped reading the story or the memoir.
Hemingway also said the best stories have the most left out. Mm-hmm. And he gave an example of a story he wrote where he left off what actually happened. He knew it, He said, you got to know what you're leaving out. You got to know it, but you can leave it out.
Yeah.
There's another question here.
Another question. And we have, I believe, 5 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you tend to want as an author, tend to want your writing to have a specific meaning, or do you prefer each reader to interpret in their own ways? Let me just say a little thing, and then you guys, what I sometimes, I don't think I want the reader to come away with a specific meaning, but I often want the reader to come away with a specific emotion. I want the reader to feel this way, feel this or that about. It doesn't necessarily have to be one emotion, but I'm more interested in the emotional response than the intellectual response from a reader. That's what, and that's my job. Like, how can I make that happen? Because that's why I read. I want to be moved. I want to feel something, because we spend our lives being distracted and all this other stuff. I want something, the Greeks called it catharsis. I want to get moved. I want to cry. I want to laugh. I want to do, and we can do it when we're reading a book and we're by ourselves and we don't feel ashamed to cry because we're not crying in front of somebody else or to laugh out loud and blah, blah, blah. So it's the emotion that I would like them to have. I don't know if I always achieve it, but that's what I'm kind of going for.
Beth Ann, we only have a couple minutes, and I got to tell you, listening to you is like being in a class, so I just want to listen to you.
I think that creating art is like participating in the gift economy, which is to say you do your part to make something beautiful and meaningful, but only when it's received by the reader does it take on meaning. So for me, the act of transmission where it blossoms in someone else's imagination is the fruitful thing that makes it art. And so it's fine with me if the reader comes to their own interpretation of something. I hope they do. I hope that hasn't been spoon-fed. And that's when the magic happens.
Yeah. I'm completely different from both of you. I'm very prescriptive and very controlling, and I want them to feel exactly what I am. No.
Yeah, you give a quiz with all your stories, and they're either right or wrong, and you just grade it and send it back. Yep. Yeah.
No, I have no idea what my stories mean when I write them. So how could I ever, presume that somebody is going to feel the way that I want them to, or think what I want them to think. I don't fool myself into thinking I have that much control over others. And so whatever they take from my stories, if they read them, I'm just grateful.
Yeah, we're not trying to send a message.
Right.
We're trying to tell a story.
Exactly.
I had two mentors, two people that, many mentors. Bill Harrison at the University of Arkansas, who was my mentor. He taught me everything I know about stories and about how to write them. And then somebody from Oxford, Mississippi, Larry Brown, who I had over down here to visit one time. And I said, come to the class, talk to the class, and tell them about what's writing. He got up, we still had chalkboards in those days. He walked up and he wrote, story, story, story. That's all you're doing. You're just trying to tell a story. You're not showing off. You're not being clear. Who cares about your style? Tell me a story. That's all. And so whatever, the stories mean different things to different people based on their experience, based on their emotional history and all that. So tell a story.
Yeah. So it says we had one. Okay. What is the best of writing lightning round? Okay. Flash.
Best writing advice I ever got was finish it. Don't think you're going to finish today or this week or this month, but you don't learn to write until you finish the story. You have a beginning, middle, and end. And now you know what you set out to write, what you actually did write. They're not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Go to work. Finish it.
The best writing I ever got was from the poet Jack Gilbert, who visited the University of Arkansas when I was an MFA student. And I was like an A student, and I was going to make my poems like mean something, and I was going to win the poem, And he told me the story about Amsterdam in the 1970s. Everyone was going to Amsterdam for obvious reasons, and they didn't have enough taxi cabs. Suddenly, they had a taxi cab shortage. And there's many one-way streets and canals in Amsterdam, so it takes a long time to become a licensed taxi driver in Amsterdam. But because they had this shortage, they brought in a second fleet of taxis, not the traditional black ones. These ones were painted red. And if you got in with a taxi driver in training, you only paid half fare, but it might take you a little longer to get there. You might take some detours. You might have to back up down a one-way street and go some other way. And he said to me, Beth Ann, take the red taxi.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And the best writing advice I ever got, and I say it to my classes all the time, give yourself permission to write poorly, and you will never have writer's block. Yeah. You just have to accept the fact that you're going to write poorly, even if you don't, no matter what. So just make peace with that. Write as much bad stuff as comes out, and then remove it before you inflict it on an audience. That's your job, is to write as much as you can, and you'll be surprised at what you discover. You might come up with one great sentence out of 100, but you wouldn't have gotten that one great sentence if you hadn't written the other 99 terrible ones. So just give yourself permission to write poorly.
So let's end here.
You froze on me.
Oh no!
I don't. Is it me? Did you freeze? Can you hear me, Tom?
Beth Ann is frozen.
Beth Ann froze.
She just said, "Let's end on."
Well, that's what she was doing, a freeze frame.
I guess so.
With her.
There she's back.
Back?
Well,
not back. Oh man, what a bummer! I wanted to hear what she had to say.
I don't know. Yeah, but I think the idea of lots of revision, overwriting is really like the shortcut. It ends up being the easier way to do it, not the harder way. That was a great metaphor that Jack Gilbert came up with about the taxis and going around. Take your time. There's no shortcut to any place worth going. Yep. That's a quote from Beverly Sills, the opera singer. There's no shortcut to any place worth going.
And I'm dying to hear what Beth Ann had to say, but I think that might be a good place to end too, because we probably have to move on. But thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to Tom. Thank you to Beth Ann for participating in this, and see you at the next session.
See you. We'll be in touch, Tom.
Okay.